How's it going, everyone? Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Swanee, and for today's video, I thought it would be fun to take a look at the weapon pick rate stats for Helldivers 2. So if you didn't know, there's a website called helldive.live, and on this site, they break down the player loadout data to try to get an idea of what stratagems, weapons, and armor the player base is currently choosing to use. And they do this by using a dummy account by running random quick matches, and then they'll take screenshots of the loadouts of the other players in the lobby. Then after thousands of matches, they'll graph all that data, and that gives us a pretty decent idea of what the current meta is and what players are choosing to bring on missions. So with Helldivers 2 releasing on Xbox and a wave of new players joining the fight, I figured I'd go over the top 10 weapons that the player base has been using since the latest war bond, just to help give new and returning players an idea as to what weapons are currently useful in the current meta. And before we get into the list, a quick heads up about the percentages you're going to see. These numbers don't add up to 100 because they're tracked separately for each enemy type: Terminids, Illuminate, and the Automatons. Now, I've combined all of those numbers together to show the overall most popular weapons, and then later on at the end of the video, I'll show you a graph scaled to 100%, so it's easier to compare the top 10 against each other. So without further ado, these are the top 10 weapons in all of Helldivers 2 based off of player pick rate over the course of the past month and a half. Coming in at number 10 with a 9.0 total pick rate is the AR-32 pacifier. The pacifier was picked by players about 3% of the time against the Terminids, 2.8% against the Illuminate, and 3.2% against the Automatons. This weapon is one of the newer weapons added to the game with the Force of Law war bond, which could explain why it has such a high pick rate. You know, newer weapons are obviously going to see more playtime because people want to play with the new stuff. But I've seen a lot of people in the community claim that they really like the pacifier. Now, the pacifier is a medium armor penetrating assault rifle that can stun enemies. Some of the biggest headaches in Helldivers 2 are those medium tier enemies like the Illuminate Overseers, the Terminid Alpha Commanders, and the Automaton Devastators. And being able to stun them and hold them in place with just a few shots is pretty nice. Yes, a dead enemy is better than a stunned enemy, which is one of the big arguments against stun weapons, but I find it's easier to deal with enemies when they aren't shooting back at me because they've been stunned. Now, using the pacifier in tandem with a teammate or even a guard dog can make for a pretty mean combo. You stun the enemies with just a couple of shots, and then your teammates or your guard dog can finish them off. Plus, with it being medium armor penetration, the community tends to gravitate towards those medium pin weapons, so I can definitely understand why the AR-32 pacifier made the top 10. Up next at number 9 with a 9.5% total pick rate is the SG-225 Breaker Shotgun. The Breaker was picked by players about 5% of the time against Terminids, 2.9% against the Illuminate, and 1.6% against the Automatons. So the community tends to like the Breaker just a bit more against the Terminids. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the Breaker has always been one of the better shotguns, even with all the buffs and nerfs over the past year, but I think the Breaker has such a high pick rate as of late because of the new weapon attachment update that came to the game earlier this year. And with the new weapon attachments, the Breaker got a pretty significant buff with the addition of both the short magazine and the drum magazine. So if you're a player that likes speed and quick reloads, then go for the short mag, but if you're the type of player that likes to just hold down the trigger and spray 26 shots into crowds of enemies before reloading, then you're going to love the drum magazine. The Breaker Shotgun has always been one of the better crowd control weapons in the game, so it makes sense that it has a high pick rate for the Terminids and the Illuminate due to the number of bug breaches and the city streets being just filled with voteless. The Breaker Shotgun has been in the game since launch, and it's pretty easy for most of the player base to unlock, which could explain why it has a higher pick rate, but at the same time, if it wasn't a good weapon, I don't think people would pick it. So either way, if you're a new player, I don't think you're going to regret unlocking and leveling up the Breaker because it's a pretty good weapon, and the player numbers reflect that, and that's why it's sitting at number 9. Now, before we go any further, I want to take this time to talk about today's sponsor, Disorder. Now, Disorder is a roguelike dungeon crawler where no challenge is wasted. Every run earns you resources you can use for permanent upgrades, making each attempt better than the last. A free DLC just dropped with 2 new characters. One's a ranged specialist and the other one summons drones to fight alongside you. And you can play Disorder right now on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X or S, and PC, including Steam Deck support. Now, it's not a Souls-like. This is fast-paced hack-and-slash chaos where you tear through hordes with powerful, customizable abilities. And you can check it out for yourselves using my link down in the description and the pinned comment down below. And thank you to Disorder for sponsoring today's video. At number 8 with an 11.4 total pick rate is the SG-225IE Breaker Incendiary Shotgun. The Breaker Incendiary dominates on the Terminid front with an 8.1% pick rate among players. It does okay against the Illuminate with a 2.6% pick rate, but then it really lacks against the Automatons, only getting picked about 0.7% of the time. So it's obviously not a great choice against the Automatons since you don't normally face large crowds of the bots, so it makes sense. With all the Terminid bug breaches and the hundreds, if not thousands of bugs that you can see in a match, the Breaker Incendiary is a great option for dealing with those large hordes of bugs. Plus, with all the buffs that fire damage has gotten over the past year, fire in general is a great counter to the Terminids. Just shoot some controlled burst into the crowds and then let the fire do all the work for you. So both in my opinion and based off the player pick rate, we seem to agree that the Breaker Incendiary is a step up from the regular Breaker for dealing damage against those large hordes of enemies. So if you like fire and you like shotguns, then you're going to love the Breaker Incendiary. Up next is the Exploding Crossbow at number 7. It had a 12.3% total pick rate versus all three factions, but it was pretty close between the three. It had 4.9% versus the Terminids, 3.6% versus the Illuminate, and 3.8% versus the Automatons. And that makes sense. I think the crossbow is an S-tier weapon. It's one-handed, so it can be used with shields, and it can be used to kill things behind you while you're on the run. It does a ton of explosive damage, so it can take out multiple enemies with just one shot, and it's the best utility weapon in the game, making it the best choice for blowing up bug holes, Illuminate ships, and bot factories. And it has medium armor penetrating, so it does everything. The only downside to the crossbow is that you can easily blow yourself up by accident if the enemies are pushing up in your face. But just bring a good secondary or a support weapon for those situations and you're all set. With how good the crossbow is, I'm honestly surprised that it isn't higher in this list, but with the new attachment system and the fact that they keep adding more new primary weapons every single month, makes for some pretty tough competition. But as of right now, the community has it at number 7. For number 6, it's the LAS-17 Double-Edged Sickle with a total pick rate of 12.8%. It was picked 2.6% versus Terminids, 4.9% versus the Illuminate, and 5.3% versus the Automatons. So this is the first weapon on the list where the Terminids didn't play as much of a role as to why the pick rate is so high. The Double-Edged Sickle is picked more against the Automatons and the Illuminate, probably due to the fact that it has both medium and heavy armor penetrating. Yes, this is the first primary weapon on the list that has heavy armor penetration. The longer you hold down the trigger on the Double-Edged Sickle, the more damage it will deal to your enemies, but you'll have to be careful because it'll also damage the user. So when you're using this weapon, you're going to want to wear the fire-resistant armor, you're going to want to dive on the ground once this weapon overheats and catches on fire, and you're going to want to have good stim management if you want to use this weapon at its full potential. It's going to be a fine balance between overheating this weapon and managing your health. And once this weapon starts to overheat and it starts doing that heavy armor penetrating, it'll kill any enemy in the game, which is very good for a primary weapon. And being able to melt through the armor on the Illuminate Overseers and the Automaton Devastators makes this a great pick for any Helldiver. This weapon can even take out Hulks in just a few seconds by shooting them in the eye, so depending on your build, you don't even really need to bring a support weapon because the Double-Edged Sickle can handle pretty much everything. I think the Double-Edged Sickle is a ton of fun, and it's honestly one of my favorite weapons in the entire game, which is why I'm glad to see that the community has put it at number 6. Then at number 5, it's the BR-14 Adjudicator, with players choosing to use it 13.4% of the time. It was picked 3.6% versus the Terminids, 4.1% versus the Illuminate, and 5.7% versus the Automatons. And this one makes perfect sense. With it doing 95 damage and having medium armor penetration, it was already a popular pick prior to the attachment update. But after the weapon attachment update, the Adjudicator got a pretty massive buff to its accuracy once you give it all the best attachments. When the Adjudicator is fully leveled up, it'll shoot like a laser beam, making it feel real easy to take out things like the Automaton Devastators and the Illuminate Overseers by just going for headshots. If one thing's for certain based off of the community pick rates, it's that the player base loves those medium armor penetrating weapons, and I can't blame them. Having a weapon that can shoot through armor definitely feels better to use than a light pin weapon where your shots just bounce off. The Adjudicator was one of my top picks in both of my weapon testing videos, which if you haven't seen them, I recommend checking them out. Both of them will be linked at the end of this video, so it's nice to see that the community feels the same way about the Adjudicator as I do. Now moving on to number 4, we start to see some pretty drastic jumps in the pick rate percentages, because coming in at number 4 is the Plaz 1 Scorcher with an 18.2% total. 3.8% for the Terminids, 6.5% versus the Illuminate, and 7.9% versus the Automatons. Now the Scorcher is an energy-based weapon that does 100 damage of light armor penetration, but it also does explosive damage which can penetrate medium armor, making it a great choice for any of those low to medium tier enemies. Now the Scorcher has received a few changes over time, letting you change its rate of fire, and they buffed it to add 5 more shots before needing to reload it. But even with those 5 additional shots, this weapon does still burn through ammo pretty quickly, so I recommend pairing it with either the Siege Ready armor or the supply backpack, or maybe even both. I personally like shooting it at the ground at enemies' feet so that the splash damage will take out large groups of enemies like the Voteless with just a couple of shots. This weapon is also another one that most players can unlock pretty early on, which makes it a great pick for new players that can carry you through most of the late game content. Overall, it's a pretty great weapon, which is why we're seeing it land at number 4. Then coming in at number 3 with a 19.7% total pick rate is the new VG70 variable. It was picked 5.1% versus the Terminids, 8.5% against the Illuminate, and 6.1% versus the Automatons, giving us our first weapon on the list where the highest pick rate was against the Illuminate. Now, obviously the variable is going to make the list because it's the latest primary weapon that's been added to the game, but that doesn't mean it doesn't belong on the list. The variable is an S-tier primary in my opinion because you essentially get 3 weapons in one with this one. The variable has 3 different firing modes, those being full auto, volley, and total mode, and each firing mode is going to excel at different situations. I normally use full auto mode for the smaller enemies, like the Voteless or those smaller automatons for example, then volley mode is for those medium tier enemies since volley does more damage, and then the total mode is for the big stuff like the flesh mobs. Now the variable only does light armor penetrating, so both volley and total modes will do more damage, but only with light armor penetration. So make sure to aim for enemy weak points or blow the armor off of an enemy first and then shoot their exposed flesh underneath. I personally love using it against things like chargers and impalers because of how quickly it can kill them. I think of the VG70 variable as the Swiss Army knife of primary weapons, where it just has a tool for almost every job, making the VG70 variable a great primary weapon choice. Then the runner-up in today's top 10 is the AR-23P Liberator Penetrator, coming in with an insane 34.2% total pick rate. It had a 9.8% pick rate against the Terminids, 11.4% against the Illuminate, and an insane 13.0 pick rate against the Automatons, thus making it the most used weapon against the Automatons. And it was the second most used against the Illuminate and the Terminids as well, so not bad. And I think the reason that the Liberator Penetrator is so high on the list is because it not only has medium armor penetrating, but after the weapon attachment update, you can give this thing a 60 round drum magazine. So that's 60 shots of medium armor penetration coming from one of the most accurate assault rifles, making this a force to be reckoned with against all 3 factions. It'll easily pop the heads against the Automaton Devastators, it'll blow through the Illuminate Overseer's armor, and it'll punch straight through that thick outer shell of the Terminid Hive Guards. And the best part is that this is another very easy weapon for new players to get early on, so if you're a new player and you're looking for a good weapon to spend your requisition points on, according to the player pick rate, this is probably your best option. And then coming in at the number 1 spot on today's list is the Eruptor, picked at a whopping 36.8% of the time in loadouts across all factions. For the Terminids, it was picked 11.9%, for the Illuminate, it was picked 12.2%, and for the Automatons, it was picked 12.7%. So it was pretty close between the 3 factions, and I think it's because fans of the Eruptor know that it's so good, it's just not worth it to put this thing down. If you want a primary weapon that can wreck pretty much any enemy in the game, then you'd want to use the Eruptor. Now the Eruptor has had many ups and downs. In fact, I think it's been nerfed, and then buffed, and then nerfed, and then buffed again. And the latest round of buffs, where they gave it heavy armor penetration and then they fixed the shrapnel direction, is why it's currently the #1 gun. With heavy armor penetration, you can take out hulks by shooting them in the eye, you can make quick work of those annoying gunships, and you can one-shot kill spewers by shooting them in the sacks, and one-shot devastators and illuminate overseers, and who am I kidding, it'll basically just wreck everything that you shoot. And since you can put different scopes on it, you can basically just treat this as a sniper rifle and pick off enemies from afar. And literally the only downside to the Eruptor is that it sucks at close range. So if an enemy's rushing up in your face and you try to shoot them, you will accidentally kill yourself. So you want to pair it with a fast secondary like the P19 Redeemer or something like the Stalwart support weapon. Both of those will make a great combo with the Eruptor. And honestly, it's worth unlocking as soon as possible if you're a new player. The Eruptor will just completely change the way that you play the game. So after adding up all of the totals, the top 10 weapons from this list alone make up almost 78% of all the weapons picked across the Terminids, Illuminate, and the Automatons. That means that nearly 8 out of every 10 loadouts are using one of these 10 guns. And here's a graph where I've scaled the list down so it adds up to 100%. That way you can see how the top 10 compare to each other. The Eruptor is the clear favorite, appearing in about 16% of loadouts throughout the entire game. And then the Liberator Penetrator is close behind at just 15%, and then the rest share the remaining spots. And just a reminder, these numbers aren't official from Arrowhead. Their numbers could very well be different, but I think this is probably a good estimate. So I recommend checking out the helldive.live website because it's pretty cool to see what weapons and what stratagems people are choosing to use against each faction. But that is going to do it for the top 10 weapons based on player pick rate in Helldivers 2. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the list, and let me know what your favorite loadouts are for Helldivers 2. So be sure to hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more gaming news and the occasional review, and I will talk to you all in the next video.